Hello, everybody, and thanks, Bernhard, for a great talk. There were a lot of things in there that I will partly touch too. Yeah, as Richie just said, I'm going to give a quick tutorial or an introduction into working with the API of Semantic MediaWiki, especially the so-called Action API. As you've already seen, there are multiple ways to get data out of Semantic MediaWiki. Result formats, RDF, store, whatever. I will not cover those, but I will have a look at the API and the capabilities of the API and also the shortcomings of the API, especially in a business context. So what I want to talk about and to show is how to, for example, deal with access controlled environments. So if you don't have an open wiki and public wiki where everybody can just grab the information that he needs, but you actually need to have some user context available to retrieve data. This is something that is quite common in the business world. And yeah, in the past we've been asked for some integration solutions where customers wanted to have their whatever system to be able to fetch or even put data into the wiki that then can be reused in another place. So let me quickly share my screen for that. This would be yes, okay. So here you see a little agenda that I have put together with a bunch of links. You can find the same content here on the Semantic MediaWiki page of this talk. So yeah, all the links are in there, so you do not need to take notes. But I don't have slides anyway, by the way. Okay, so let's start with the first part here, the ways to get data out of SMW. We already heard a lot of them. Usually you're using some kind of a result format. In most cases, you're using the ask parser function and some kind of a result format to to create an output of your data within the wiki itself, maybe with custom formatting using a template format. Or you can also use special result formats like the JSON format or the feed, spreadsheet, or CSV format. All for, or these are all machine readable formats that can be consumed by some application. It's rather easy to use them. You can see I've just created a bunch of links here. Let's have a quick look at how this is, how this looks like in the source code. You can see it's just a regular ask query, having the condition, having a set of printouts being defined, and then given the proper format here, in this case, CSV, JSON, or feed, and that's it. And instead of creating a real output here, the Semantic MediaWiki will create those links. And if you click those links, it will provide you with a download of those files. For example, here those CSV file. You can see I can now open my spreadsheet application, and it will give me a way to import that information. Same goes for the JSON format, for example, which looks like this. I need to lint it quickly because it is unformatted. So you get some structured output here. By the way, this format will will appear later on again when we're talking about the API. It's rather similar, or basically the same as this one. And of course, the RSS feed, this is nothing too new here. That's an XML-based feed where you have those, where you have this information in here. It is, in this case, it is missing, actually, it is missing the printout data. So the RSS feed just points to the pages in your wiki, but not giving you a structured access to any of the fields, of the properties that you have defined on them. So those are the regular ways to get a machine readable output from the wiki. And if you look at those links, these are just URLs, and the URLs they point to the special ask special page and parameterize it and give the query and the print request and everything to that page, and this page will then return a file. Now, as I said, this is a simple way to do it and an easy way to do it, but in some scenarios, this can be quite problematic, because if your wiki is not open for reading for anybody, but is set behind some kind of a authentication mechanism, you might not be, your consuming service might not be able to fetch that data right away. And for such cases, you can have different approaches here to get the data. Oh, there's one thing I forgot actually about those result formats. This is something I just learned a few days ago. There is another way to bring data into other applications. In this case, it was Microsoft Power BI. So if anybody of you is using Microsoft tools in the company and Power BI is available, you might want to know how to get data from the wiki from Semantic MediaWiki into your Power BI. Then I can tell you, Power BI is capable of actually scraping the contents of an HTML table. But here also we might have an issue with the authentication, if this is the case for your internal company wiki, for example. So the next way to get the data would be to use a SPARQL backend. So we could populate the data from the Semantic MediaWiki into some additional backend and just query this one. Again, here might be authentication considerations to be made, but they may be way different from the ones that the actual wiki has. So, for example, in a wiki where people are actually working, you might have an authentication scenario where everybody needs to be authenticated and maybe some authorization levels. But for your data consuming services, the SPARQL backend might be quite open, actually. I cannot demonstrate this because I don't have a SPARQL backend set up. Important for you to know is that this actually requires an additional infrastructure. While Semantic MediaWiki can export RDFA data, it does not have a SPARQL endpoint to actually query the data. Now, what I'm want to talk about is the Action API here. This is the way that we use rather frequently in such cases. And just for you as an information, there's another way to export data. That is this is some kind of an extension, data transfer, where you can also export data on the server side, and then use it for consumption somewhere else, but I won't go into detail here. I want to talk about the MediaWiki Action API and the Semantic MediaWiki Action API. So first of all, you need to know that the MediaWiki Action API is a non-standard web API. So it is more or less a homegrown API that you first need to learn about. You need to read about how to use it. But the good news is it is very well documented, as this is the API of the Wikipedia up to the current date, actually. There is a lot of information around in the web and on MediaWiki.org in particular. So you can see this is the MediaWiki.org page, and you've got a very well structured and detailed documentation of this API where you can look everything up. And basically everything that you can do with the wiki user interface, with the web view, you can also do in some way with the web API. For example, editing pages, deleting, creating pages, moving pages, also doing some user-related operations like setting user options and so on. So yeah, again, this is a very powerful API, and it's very well documented. You can find it here on MediaWiki.org. The important thing about the web API, the Action API, is it can handle authentication. So you can establish a user context by using certain API endpoints. Again, I've linked that. So this is there's a dedicated API for logging into the wiki, and be aware with that here in this case. There are multiple ways to do a login, actually. So it depends very much on how you have your wiki set up in means of authentication. Let's say if you have a form-based authentication with something like an LDAP backend, or if you have an OpenID based authentication, or whatever kind of authentication you might have set up, you will need to check whether the Action API is capable of doing this. In most cases, it is actually, and how to deal with those particular authentication methods. Here's a simple example in the documentation. That's the regular username password authentication, which allows you to basically do what you would do on the wiki website by putting in a username and a password into a special login page. The important thing is that this API will return you a session cookie then that you need to send with all follow-up requests. So the login is the first step in your data retrieval process. You first need to authenticate. Then after you're authenticated successfully, you have a session, and then all the follow-up requests, all the extracting of the data must be handled with this session, with this user session. And another good reason for choosing this API is that there's actually a very wide range of client libraries available. So while it is a web API and can basically be accessed by anything that can open a HTTP-based network connection, it can be quite difficult to understand processes in there and to learn about all the concepts. The good news is, again, as this is a Wikipedia API, there are lots of client libraries out there that help you doing exactly this. So In your company or in your use case, you can choose here from a set of languages, of programming and scripting languages, and just use one of the existing libraries. You do not need to implement everything from the scratch. It's in many cases it's much easier to just reuse one of those libraries, especially this authentication part, because those things are mainly implemented in those libraries. It is a little bit you see there's lots of libraries around, and they are not all feature equal, right? Every library will have slightly different interfaces, of course, will have slightly different number of functions that you can use out of the box, but the most common ones are all in or implemented in all of them. So especially in the business context and personal context, you have people asking for a .NET or Java library for doing the communication here. You can also use the MediaWiki Action API from within the MediaWiki. So this is especially interesting if you plan to do either an extension, or if you're not that much of an extension developer, some kind of a gadget or just a little script in your MediaWiki common.js file, where you want to provide your users with some additional functionality. That's quite nice thing. It's a JavaScript interface for interacting with the API. It already has a lot of cool stuff built in. Of course, in this case, nothing Semantic MediaWiki specific, but most of the things that you find in the MediaWiki API itself. So let's have a quick look. For anybody that didn't know that this documentation yet, I can really recommend it. This is a very comprehensive documentation of all kinds of JavaScript interfaces that are available in the MediaWiki application in general. Please check if you're on the proper version of the documentation. The documentation is also versioned. So if you're working on a well 135, which is the latest long-term support release of MediaWiki, then you might want to use that documentation, of course. So this is important to know because MediaWiki and Wikipedia develops very fast, and if you're just looking at the latest documentation, there might be misleading information, especially when you're working on a long-term support basis, of course. So again, this abstraction here gives you a lot of comfort, a lot of convenience functions for doing all kinds of actions. For example, there are plugins for various actions like editing or parsing data right away. So you don't need to do all the groundwork here. This is all implemented. It also has a very nice implementation for dealing with tokens. So this must be said. The MediaWiki API is protected by all kinds of tokens for against misuse or against various ways of attacks. And dealing with those tokens can also be challenging. But again, if you've got a library at hand like this one for use within MediaWiki, or one of the other ones for use from an external source, then you're pretty much well prepared for such cases, because token handling, access token handling, will be mainly managed by those libraries. Okay, but now we want to come to the semantic MediaWiki part. That's the important one. Semantic MediaWiki itself exposes two kinds of action, two action APIs. This is the Ask API and the askargs API. So what is the difference between those APIs? The Ask API will take just one parameter. Actually, it will just take a regular or almost regular ask query with the conditions, with the printouts, and with various parameters that you might have, like sorting, ordering, page sizes, limits, and so on. While this is very convenient, if you've got already a bunch of ask queries available in your wiki that you just want to fire from some external machine, it is more complicated if you want to have your query be built in some dynamic way, because you would need to have a you would need to construct that ask query in your code, which is a little bit more difficult for you to implement. And this is where the askargs API comes in handy, because it splits up the query and allows you to specify the conditions separately from the printouts and from the parameters. Let's have a quick look at how this works. So first of all, for all of you who have not visited the API yet, this is the entry point of the MediaWiki Action API. It's a PHP file, api.php, which resides in the same place as the index.php, as the main entry point for the web interface. And it has a very nice feature. If you access it in a browser, like I did, it will create some kind of a self or auto documentation. So besides what you have already seen on the MediaWiki.org page that I have shown, you will find a lot of information on the API endpoint itself. And this is especially true for extensions. While the basic MediaWiki API endpoints, or modules as they are called, are very well documented on MediaWiki.org, the extensions may not have this kind of a documentation. But here you can find additional documentation. Let's have a quick look here at the ask or the askargs. Let's just have a look at the askargs in this case, because that's the one that I personally favor. Here you can see it tells you about the parameters of this action equals ask. It tells you that you can have a parameter conditions, a parameter printouts, and parameters to be specified. And from in many cases, actually, there's an example on those pages. In this case, unfortunately, there's not an example. So examples would be listed at the very end of this page, of the detailed documentation page here, and would give you a quick way to test the API. But this is rather difficult to do, as you would need to put all the conditions and all the parameters in the address bar, and this quickly becomes very hard to do because it's long and it's URL encoded and stuff like this. So there's a much nicer way to do this, especially if you want to get used to the API and play around with the API. My recommendation is to look at the a special page that is called Special API Sandbox. So this is a special page within the standard MediaWiki package that allows you to test all kinds of APIs that are available. And this is and also it incorporates that documentation that we just saw on the API endpoint, and it will put this kind of documentation in this nice user interface too. So if I'm scrolling down a little bit, you can see there's an action drop down, and here we can see the same list of actions that we just saw on the API endpoint, and I can now select, for example, the ask action. I can then choose the result format that I want to have. Be aware this is not the same as the result format that you know from the ask parser function. This is really just the question of what kind of a machine-readable standard format should be returned. This is not the same as you have on the ask parser function. Usually you want to have JSON, of course, because it's the most modern and it's a lightweight format to do this. If you then click the action equals ask element in this tree view here, you can see there I can now specify the query. By the way, obviously there are some descriptions missing. Maybe it's just my setup, or maybe it's missing from the application. I didn't check that, but usually there should be a real description for those elements. And in this case, it's just missing. So let's check something like that. This let's say I have a query that is called company. Company : plus, which means give me all the pages or all the data sets that have a company property set. I can run the make request, and you can see I get a nicely formatted output here that I can immediately read and that I can check if it suits my needs. It will also create me that URL, of course, that could be reused in a script then. And I can now go back to the to that first option here and alter my query. Let's say I want to have a print request. Let's say I want to see the city property and maybe the company itself, company. And if I run that, you can see in the query section there is a subsection called print request, and this now shows me the city and the company properties. It also gives me lots of information about this these properties. It tells me that this is a wiki page. It's a type ID, WPG. It's a wiki page. There may be other types, like the regular ones that you know from Semantic MediaWiki, like Boolean or number or text or whatever. So it mainly depends on how the property itself is defined. And then in the results section, you will find the subject. In this case, it is a semantic sub-object. So there's a page encoded and some kind of a hash that identifies the data sets in a unique way. And here are the printouts encoded that I have requested. I wanted to know about the city, and I wanted to know about the company. Both are pages in the wiki itself, and they have a full text, a URL, and some additional information here. And of course, this section here, this will be different from data type to data type. A Boolean data type will not have a full URL, for example. Okay, so here's how to use this this Ask API. If I go back now and maybe switch to that askargs API, you can see I now have multiple fields to fill in. There's the conditions. Let's do the same as before. And we can specify the printouts one by one. So for example, city. And here you can see the user interface supports me a lot more than it did in the regular ask action. It tells me that this is a multi-value field, for example, and it visualizes this by creating those nice pills here that shows which elements I have set or not. And then, of course, I can give some additional stuff like limit equals 5, something like that. And again, make me request. Okay, my bad here. In this case, I need to omit the brackets. Yeah, that's the. So basically, it's the same output as we had before. It should be limited to 5, of course. That's the only difference to my first query. So here you see this is a really nice interface for learning about the API, for playing around with it, and for seeing what results are actually returned in the end. So you can adapt your external script, your external consumer accordingly to the results here. There's also a client code integration, so very similar to what we had on for the regular Action API in MediaWiki, where you can use such a JavaScript object within your wiki applications context. There's something similar for Semantic MediaWiki, but to be honest, it's rather slim. It doesn't have too much of convenience functions. It will do some nice things, like it will reformat the data a little bit, so it's easier to consume for your JavaScript code that you might have written. And it will also do some client-side caching, if it is required or not. But that's basically all. So all the other things like parameterizing the API call is not really handled by this kind of integration. But again, this is just one case for using the API. Usually you would want to use the API from an outside location, from an external script anyways. And in this case, you have other ways to implement it. Okay, and I just want to give this is almost everything here. I want to mention that there are also third-party SMW Action API modules, and there are two in particular that I want to mention. One is for PageForms. This is actually a very nice one, because Semantic MediaWiki doesn't really have a good way to get the unique values, the distinct values of a property, and the PageForms autocomplete actually does have something like this. So let's quickly move to that one. So let's have a look. PageForms autocomplete, and yeah, I can check for. I can give a property name, of course. Let's say company again, and I can say give me all that have an A in it, for example, and it will create me a nice list of property values. So that's a little bit a different way to consume the data here, but actually it might be more convenient than using the regular Semantic MediaWiki API. So this is a good way to find such information. And last but not least, there is the BlueSpiceSMW-Connector, where we have something similar. Actually, that's this property store, which will also give values from properties. And rather new, there will be there's an ask-store. Actually, it is not really published yet, but we're working on that, which will give you a very similar way to run queries as askargs, but actually in a even more convenient way, by allowing to specify various filters for each property that you have in there without needing to compose a condition string or condition string. So in the askargs, for example, you have only one field for the condition, and the SMW connector-ask-store will be able to get in a list of actual filter values, and it will combine those filter values to a proper query on the server side and then deliver the results. So it's a little bit more convenient to do this than the other ones. Yeah, that's it. Okay.